We're really excited today to have Todd Cranney on the Ever Onward podcast. Todd is the owner and managing partner of Riverwood Strategies here in Boise. He grew up in Oakley, Idaho, as a farm kid. A farm kid probably doesn't do it justice. It's one of the largest farms, Cranney Farms. It's a seventh generation farm in Oakley, Idaho. After attending Brigham Young University, he did an internship in Washington, D.C., and his life took a sharp turn towards politics, and Todd has basically run campaigns all over the United States for the last 20 years. He's been involved in several large campaigns, President Bush's reelect, Arnold Schwarzenegger's reelect in California, and he worked for Mitt Romney for his two elections. Todd has a lot of great stories. He is a great friend and a great Idahoan and American. Really looking forward to hearing from him today. Before we talk to Todd today for the Allquist update, we'll have Ryan Cleverly on, just talking a little bit about updated news with our company, and then we'll hear from Todd Cranney of Riverwood Strategies. Ryan Cleverly doing our Allquist update this week. Man, we got a lot going on.
We do. There's always something. But it's like I always tell everybody, they always say you're really busy. And we are. But when you talk to a lot of developers, everybody feels busy, but it's hard right now.
Don't you think it's harder than ever to just kind of, it just seems like we're slogging a lot trying to get things done. It's harder. I think costs are high.
Costs are high. Rates are high. It's made it challenging. And the reality is it's July of 2024. There's this thing called the election in November 2024. And you kind of get into this window of time where everybody's like, let's wait and see. Yeah. So we're kind of in that wait and see moment before companies and banks and investors kind of want to see what's going to happen.
Well, and surprisingly for us here, you hear about depression in the market everywhere else. We still have low inventory on. There's still labor still high. Yeah, it's still kind of hard. We didn't. Remember last recession, we kind of had a reset. Yeah. And some things were easier because you had a reset.
Well, everybody's been waiting for some sort of a reset. But the reality is, I think there's areas or pockets that you might be seeing some sort of a reset, maybe on the residential side. But Boise's not probably going to see that kind of a reset. It's really strong here. And while I'm coming out a little bit on the negative side of what's happening in the market, there are incredible opportunities at the same time. People are moving here. And it all depends on how you view the world, right? I kind of view people moving here as, it's positive for development, it's positive for growth. But we've always said this, and that's why we're in the business that we're in. We want to control part of that narrative. We want to not control it, but help be a part of it. Yep. Help put the infrastructure in place that's going to make Boise great for our kids and their kids. And that's what we got to try to do.
Yeah, we still have the best place on the planet to live, and we do. People know that, and people are still coming here. We talked a little bit about this, but I do think that the entire country right now is just kind of like, oh my goodness, like we've never been in times like this. Yeah. You're still kind of in this slowdown. You got inflation that we're watching every month, and you got this election and the craziness of presidential politics going on right now, and how that's going to all go internationally. All these geopolitical threats that are going on, and what's going on in the Middle East. So, I think as a businessman, what you've been in this a long time in a lot of different industries. What you can do is just kind of control what you can control. Yep. And you plow forward every day, and you just get through it, right?
I went to an event. You were there for part of it last Friday night. Listened to a lot of, again, the geopolitical side of it, and at the end of it, the most positive thing that came out of it for me, and this is probably getting like hyper religious, and I don't mean to go there, but we kind of know how we win this thing. Yeah. And it's faith in a higher power, I'll call it. Yeah. We have to believe in that. We have to believe that things are going to be okay. Yeah. But we can't stand by idly waiting for someone else to fix it. Yeah. Let's get after it, and let's go figure out how we're going to do this stuff, but it's going to work out. Yeah. So, it's a crazy, crazy time. I don't know that I would want to be a 20-year-old right now going into this whole world, but they see it differently than we do. Yeah. We didn't grow up in their time, and so they're like, what are you talking about? This is incredible. I've got so much opportunity, and they do. So I think it's all perspective, and we just have to keep plowing forward and saying, hey, we're gonna make it work. We live in a great place. I mean, I feel incredibly blessed to live where we live. Yeah. You go look at the world You just go read headlines, and you're thinking, man, I'm so glad. I have to deal with the smoke in the air today.
Yeah.
People are dealing with a whole lot of worse things to deal with, and we're pretty blessed to live where we do. It's a pretty cool place to be.
Amen. That was awesome.
Well,
that's our update for this week.
That's it.
We're glad we're in America. We're glad we're in Idaho.
And it's going to be great.
It's going to be great.
Yeah.
Thanks, buddy.
Thanks.
How are you, buddy?
I'm good, man. How are you doing?
It's awesome to have you here.
It's great to be here. You must be really hard up.
Well, you were on. So we have a list of people to come on, right?
All right.
And you're like
You're like 99 out of 100.
Listen to this guy. One of my favorite guys. One of the favorite guys in the world. You're giving me crap. But let me tell you what happened. So I have you down. Like she's calling, setting up the next set of them, and I think you got to call Todd. And you know Fahim Rahim?
Oh yeah. Oh,
So he was coming on today. He's a kidney doctor, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
He's in the hospital with kidney stones. Oh. So he texted me this morning. He's like, "Hey." So anyway,
Poor
I'm
guy.
like, "You have Todd's around."
Oh my gosh.
Thanks for
Well,
going. How's Riggs?
Riggs is awesome, man. We just got back from Pace's wedding. My brother's son.
Didn't you go to like Vermont?
Yeah, he did in Vermont. Beautiful spot, hard to get to, and then we got caught in the Delta.
Did you?
Oh yeah,
With Riggs.
with Riggs in Minneapolis Airport.
Holy
We were much more fortunate than others. We had to spend the day in Minneapolis overnighted, and then we were lucky we got a flight out on Monday morning and got home. But man, there were a lot of people that were in a tougher shape than we were.
So for our listeners, Todd Cranney, longtime friend, but bachelor.
Yeah, long-time bachelor.
But got married and have a little baby, Riggs. When's his birthday?
So his birthday is Saturday. So
I knew it was getting close.
Yep. And then we have 3 others. My wife has, we have our son Nix, who's 12. We have Ruby, who's 8. And then we have Keely, who's 10. And they're awesome.
You're loving it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's everything I dreamed it would be, and we're grateful. So Crease has been amazing, and she was a trooper. And Riggs was a trooper. He was a champ getting through the trip because we were very compacted because we needed to get back to grab the other kids, and so it was like land.
So how long was the delay?
So we landed in Minneapolis to connect around midday, and we got left for the airport at 5 a.m. like 3 a.m. our time. And then it was delayed until the next morning. And like I said, we were very fortunate we got out.
Because there's some people, it's like days, right?
There were like guys that had been there 3 days.
So you had to go to a hotel, or did you?
Yeah, we grabbed a hotel. We begged the Uber
stuff,
driver.
right?
Yeah, we had no stuff. We had to beg the Uber driver to let us go because the car seat was checked. We had nothing. He basically broke the law to let us get us to the hotel. And then I went to Target and got some stuff for Riggs because we needed some extra diapers and stuff. So anyway, all good problems. We're grateful. And like I said,
well, hey, this is going to be fun. It's going to be a lot of catch up though, because back when you were a bachelor,
yeah.
And you always were, you would call, you would write, you would text me, we'd see each other, we'd go to lunch. And now it's like, hey, where did Todd Cranney go?
I know. Well, I'm still around.
I had to give you a little bit of grief because when I was in McCall, I saw your sister.
Yep.
And she's like, "Hey, have you seen Todd? Is he still around?" And she was totally kidding. She was like, "I don't know what happened to that guy."
I know it's been awesome, but it's definitely been a change, but a good change. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Hey, so tell us a little. You've got a fascinating story, and I want to get a little bit into politics with you today.
Sure.
But spent your whole life in politics as a political consultant for various campaigns all around the country.
Yep.
Give me a little bit, because a lot of it is really high-profile stuff you did for a long time.
Yeah. Well, as you know, we have a farm and ranch in southern Idaho where I was born and raised, so I'm fifth-generation Idahoan, and the farm's been in our family for over 110 years. I don't remember the exact number now. It's been so long.
I'm going to stop you every once in a while. So from Oakley.
Yes, from Oakley.
From Oakley, Idaho, as Idaho as it gets.
Yep.
And you always talk about the family farm. And then the first time I got to go visit the farm, when we talk about farm, Todd, this is like how many acres? This thing is like the sun never rises or sets on Cranney Farm, right?
Yeah, well, no, I mean, we're grateful. We have about 20,000 acres we farm, and then we have cattle as well. We have probably about 3,000 head of cattle now. And my 2 cousins and my brother run the day-to-day of the farm. And then I'm fortunate enough to be involved in the business side and sit on the board of the farm today. So it's obviously a big part of who we are and a big part of our life. I mean, couldn't be more grateful, super lucky where we were born and raised, super proud of, obviously my dad and his two brothers were the fourth generation, took the farm to another level, and then my cousins and my brother have really taken the farm to another level. We're working on generation 6 right now. Both my one cousin has a son home, and then my brother has a son home, and so we're working on the transition to the 6th generation, and we actually have 7 generations on the farm right now. Both those kids have sons that we hope will take over the business in the 7th generation. So
it's amazing.
Yeah, we're grateful. I mean, there's a lot of stories across Idaho like that. So we are not unique in that regard, probably unique nationally, not as unique as it is in Idaho. You hear that a lot, which is one of the things that is unique, I think, about Idaho is that you have a lot of that sort of generational family farming and ranching history and heritage. And it's a big part of who you are. And that's what I grew up doing. Went to college at BYU, studied business management, and my plan the entire time was to go back to the farm. And as you know, I still love the farm, and I actually loved the farming, doing the work. I actually really loved it. I fell in love with it I wasn't as excited about it when I was probably in high school and stuff, when you were just doing whatever you were told. But I became really excited about it when I was in college, and I would go home every summer and run my dad's portion of the management piece of the farm, and learned so much and loved it, and was always planning on going back to the farm, and that was what I was going to do, and I made up my mind. And so that's why I studied business management, finance. My dad was hilarious, as you know. My
your dad
man.
was.
He's like, "You want to come back to this son of a gun in place? You might want to learn some business. I can teach you the farming." So anyway, that was exactly what he said to me.
No, they broke the mold with old Bill.
Yeah, he was amazing. We learned so many things, and so my senior year of college at BYU, I'd always been interested in politics, but I wasn't super involved at all. I wasn't a member of any club or whatever. I just had followed it, and I read a book about President Bush at the time, and I thought, I'm gonna graduate. I'm gonna go back to the farm. That's what I'm gonna do. Maybe it'd be interesting to do an internship and do something else. And so I applied for a bunch of internships in D.C., and I applied to the White House, but I thought there's no way I'll get there. It's whatever. It was the fall of 2001. And I applied to a bunch of different internships, and then I got accepted to some. I didn't hear anything from the White House, which I thought was a long shot anyway. Accepted and was getting ready to go back to D.C. Actually interned for Senator Crapo, who's now a client of mine, by the way. I've helped run his campaigns the last couple times. And so all of a sudden I was out, and I remember this day, is I'm out on the farm actually running a grain combine. And my dad had those two-way radios on the farm. They don't do as much anymore, but everyone can hear it. My dad gets on the radio and calls me, and he's like, "Hey, there's somebody on the phone from the White House that wants to talk to you." And I got offered an internship at the White House. And so, of course, I took it, and Senator Crapo's office was really understanding and great, and we made the change. And so I arrived in D.C. the fall of 2001, just a few days before 9/11. And so I was there for 9/11, and that was just obviously it was a historic and just a tragic and just a crazy day in American history. And I was at the White House when that happened, and that day, which is a longer, I could tell you the whole story of that day, which was just crazy, just totally embedded in my mind. You'll never forget. After that, the rest of my internship experience was just so interesting and unique that I had a semester left at BYU to finish my degree.
Before you go on, what was it? Because you think about how pulled apart we are as a nation. You go back to that time after 9/11.
Yeah.
It was, at least in my lifetime, was this time. You remember President Bush visiting the site. You remember, everywhere you went, flags. And it was like everyone put down partisan, disagreements. And for one I don't know how long it lasted, Todd, whether that was a day or a week or months, but it was like we were all united as Americans for a short time.
Yeah.
What was that like being in the White House during that time?
Yeah, it was crazy. So, I was an intern among, there were 100 and whatever many interns, so I'm not going to sit here and tell you I was hanging out with George W. Bush in the Oval Office. I got a chance to, be in meetings and stuff with him or whatever, and in the Oval Office. But I remember that day. What was crazy about that day was multiple things. One was it was a beautiful September day, and I was answering the phones, as an intern does, and all of a sudden we had the TV on, and we were watching Fox News, And when we first saw the visuals of the Twin Towers, you got to remember now it's pretty normal for everyone to think about terrorism, but in that time frame, pre-2001, 9/11, you really couldn't really comprehend
like, what's happening?
What's going on. So we literally watched it and we're like, man, well, maybe there's, it's maybe some of the Cessnas got mixed up. I mean, you really are thinking about stuff that really isn't logical. Like, how could a couple Cessnas hit that and do that damage? But you're just not processing that it was terrorism in any way, shape, or form at the time. And you're just seeing it real live. And we were watching it. And then the president came on and made his brief speech in Florida. We knew he was in an education trip in Florida at the time. And then as soon as he got done, like, my phone started lighting up, and they're like, we're getting evacuated from our boss. I was working in the Intergovernmental Affairs Office at the time, which deals with the governors and all of the elected officials. And they're like, we're getting evacuated. What are you doing? And I was like, I don't know what's going on. And then as soon as I hung up, our Uniformed Secret Service came to our office and was like, get out, get out, get out. And they just rushed us out of the White House, out of the west wing of the White House, or out of the west. I was in the executive office building at the time, and they exited us out of the west side of the White House. And when that happened, like, they were just screaming at us to run. It was, everyone was running, pick up your shoes, ladies with high heels, and it was crazy. And as soon as we exited the west side of the White House complex, I looked to my left, which is south, and there you could see the smoke billowing from the Pentagon. And then you looked up, and literally you saw the Secret Service on the top of the White House with surface-to-air rocket launchers, and everyone was pointing in the air because there was a commercial airliner in the air. And at the time, we didn't know what was going on because even pre-9/11, the airspace around D.C. was always restricted, but Reagan Airport's right on the edge of it, and so they skirt it, as they land, as they do today. But no one was used to seeing a commercial airliner in the top, and so it was like, what is going on here? Like, the Secret Service, like, everyone knew. Like, when I saw the smoke, that's when I realized, like, something is fundamentally wrong here. But again, you're not on there were no cell phones at the time. You're not, like, on TV. Yeah. You're living this real life. You don't know what's going on. We're standing next to that thing, and literally, what I learned later was that plane was on approach to Reagan when the FAA shut down all the airports across the country, had nowhere to go, so they were circling. And some of the jets that were scrambled to try to catch some of the planes in different places eventually landed that plane because they didn't, they were just trying to land every plane because no one knew what was going on. And so at this point, we're standing there next to the White House. And so I'd been in D.C. like 4 days. I rode in, I was living in Falls Church, Virginia, rooming with some guys. And basically, they dropped me off at the White House. Like, I didn't know anything. I didn't know where I was, what was going on. I had been there once when I was in high school, but I didn't know anything. And literally, like, one of my bosses said, hey, do you want me to try to drive you home? And I'm like, no, just get home to your family because I don't even know how to describe really how to, for you to take me home. But I knew enough a little bit. We'd come in the weekend before on the T system, so I just kind of follow my way out. So as I'm working my way out, they shut down all the metro system, and the metro, it's like T's in Boston, but metro is what they call it, the subway system in D.C. They'd shut it all down inside of the city, the district. And I'm starting to just be like, okay, what do I do? You just got to stay calm. And it's a weird thing to say this, but it really was one of the most comforting things that I thought in my mind, which I know probably sounds strange to some, is that the last thing I saw was President Bush. And he just, and I just kept thinking in my mind, okay, he's airborne on Air Force One. They're figuring out what's going on. There's nothing you can do. Yeah. You just gotta find your way home. That's what you gotta do here. And literally, I run into this guy on the side of the street, dressed business guy, just a buttoned up guy, and he had lost it. And he's up against the wall, and he's like, they're gone. They're blankety blank gone. And I'm like, sir, are you okay? What's gone? And he's like, the Twin Towers are gone. And he said another plane swooped in. And I'm like, and then I was like, and so in my mind, when I saw the last thing I saw on Fox News, like, they were just on fire. It didn't look like it was that much damage. And I was like, And then I heard that they hit the Sears Tower. And then I heard that they hit the State Department. And there was all this misinformation. And you're hearing all this stuff as you're wandering through D.C. And I was just wandering my way to the edge of D.C. so I could try to find a metro stop because they'd shut all the metros down inside, but they were still letting some go out of D.C. And we were living in Virginia. And so I finally worked my way to this stop, and I can't remember the stop now. It was a blue line stop, orange blue line stop. And it's this, like, escalator that's just like, I don't know how to describe it, but like the longest escalator in history. You drop down into the metro. And we're just packed in there, working our way slowly in. And right as we're about to get into the metro, and this takes like a while, this lady just freaks out and says, I got to get out of here. This is a good place for a bomb. And I was like, and me and this Air Force guy, he was a uniformed Air Force guy, was just like, calm down. And as soon as the door opened, when we finally got the door, I mean, people were almost cramming onto each other. Everyone was really panicky. And finally, we get inside the metro. And I hadn't been really scared at this point because I was really more just like, whoa, what's going on? This is, fast. I mean, holy cow. I mean, what's happening? What's happening? But we get in the metro, and we go, and it goes underneath the Potomac, right, take you out to Virginia. And we stop. No lights. It's dark. We sit there for like 15 minutes. And that's the first time I contemplated my eternal perspective of like,
you're like, hey, this may be it.
It's been a good 21. I can't remember how old I was, 24, but it's been a good 24 years. I've had a good ride. It's over. I really thought it was over. And then eventually I got out and then got to the stop because I just kind of figured out how to get to the stop I needed to get to. And then I got a cab. And again, no cell phones. Like I didn't have a cell phone. I don't think it would have mattered because things would have been overloaded. Got back to our apartment we were at a townhouse in Falls Church, Virginia, and my roommates were there, and they were just like, oh, they were grateful I was there. And I had a big mobile Motorola farm that we had from the farm that they took with me. Yeah. And so I called my parents from that, but I didn't take it with me. It was just there as emergencies. And I got a hold of my parents. But when I walked in, like that's when it was real, like Twin Towers were gone, and you could get the update. Because at this point, I didn't know anything about what was really going on. So that was just one of the craziest days. And then after that, the thing I'll tell you, the finished part of this is the contrast of the next day. So the president flew back, as you know, and everyone knows kind of the story of the rest of that, so I don't relive that. But he gets back in the White House. One of the things I will say that was an interesting story was when he flew back from Andrews that night, he flew over cover, and, it's Marine One, there's 3 of them, and you never know which one is the president, and they do that obviously for decoys and stuff. And so they flew from Andrews, and they flew near the Pentagon, and the president, and they flew over the Pentagon, and ultimately they banked and took a look. And I never forget what Karl Rove told us, his story about this. He said that basically when they banked over, the president said, take a good look at this, boys. This is what war looks like in the 21st century. And so they landed, and then the president was bound to determine that a White House would be open for business the next day. And the next day, I couldn't tell you, Tommy, how big of a contrast the day was. September 11th was a beautiful, amazing September day in D.C. The next day, it was rainy, and the White House was cordoned off 6 blocks around. There was the National Guard was in the streets. I mean, you couldn't get anywhere near without your pass to get into the White House. Like, the contrast was so different, and obviously that shaped President Bush's presidency, and I'm still a huge fan. There's a lot of differing opinions and different things he wasn't perfect on. I understand, but that guy was a man of moral courage and character, still is, and had a huge moral compass and did what he thought was right and what he thought was right for the American people. And he really particularly did that during that period of time, and I think he did it through his entire presidency, despite any mistakes he may have made.
Amen. Sorry. That was a huge derail, but I never heard that whole story.
Yeah, and like, I can remember that day like it was yesterday. It was, I can still remember that. Some days, you know how it goes. It's just indexed in your mind. And so the reason I brought that story up is because after I graduated from the Y, I had a semester left, because I just did the fall internship, and then I went back, finished my degree, and then I went back to the farm. And it was great, and I loved it. And it was the hardest decision I've ever made in my life. But, I just had kind of thought, am I doing this because this is what I'm supposed to do, or am I doing this because this is what I'm expected to do? And again, I loved farming. I was single, as you know, long-time bachelor. And that continued for a long time until recently, thankfully. And basically what happened was I just was like, I just knew. And actually the conversation with my dad was what cinched it. And my dad, obviously, he wanted me to stay. And that was actually one of the funnest things was working with my dad. And I love my dad. And, he's my hero. But I talked to my dad, and I asked him about it. And he said, son, in life, you're going to be a pro. You're going to make a lot of decisions. And he said, sometimes, right or left, you're not 100% sure. And what he told me essentially was like, look, you're going to make some decisions, and sometimes you're going to wonder, I went right, should I have went left? He said, and if that's a small part of what you're thinking, that's normal. You always maybe have some wonders about whether you should have went left when you went right. He said, but if it's a big part of what you're thinking right now, then you probably got to go try something else and see if this is the right thing to do for you. And that's what, I'll never forget it. And that was what basically made the final decision. So I moved to D.C., and that's when my political career started. And then I was planning on coming back a bunch of times. And my cousins and my brother are probably grateful I didn't. But I've actually, I think, been more helpful to them now, honestly, than if I would have come back sooner. But, and that just led to one thing led to another, and led to started my political career, and that's where we went.
So worked. I want to get into some of these because you have some great. I think I first met you on the Mitt Romney campaign.
Yep. Back the first time. Yeah. I've worked on both of Mitt's campaigns. I started on President Bush's reelection campaign, and again, that's what the motivation was I wanted to work for him. I was a big fan of him, and so I moved back to D.C. I worked on the Hill for a year while the campaign was getting ramped up, and then I went to work for the president's campaign in D.C. and then got sent out to California and Nevada. And after the president won, there was a job at the White House, but wasn't quite ready or available. And this is actually a great story, and this actually was another turning point for me in my life. So I took a political appointment at the Department of Agriculture and the FSA office, which was really cool and interesting, and I thought it'd be interesting from the farm stuff. And I was still very seriously thinking about going back to the farm pretty immediately. So I took that job while the White House job was kind of getting ready to go. They had a job, but it was going to take some time before they would have the transition. And you'll appreciate this knowing my dad as well. Like I called my dad and I was like, hey, you know that thing you said about the Department of Agriculture? And he's like, no, what? And I said, you could get rid of 80% of it, you never know it was there. And he's like, yeah. And I was like, well, you were wrong. And he's like, oh yeah, big shot, big DC guy, huh? Yeah. You know more than I do. And I said, no, you were wrong. You get rid of 95% of it, and you would never know it was there. And he laughed, and he goes, well, I'm glad you're learning something back there. And then I'm editing very heavily what my father said, because he had a very colorful, in a good way, colorful set of vocabulary from the farm. But anyway, so I took that job for a little bit, and then I kind of got restless while the White House job was going, because it was pretty boring at the Department of Ag, although I was involved in the Hurricane Katrina stuff, and that was actually really interesting, and the recovery pieces of that in Mississippi and Louisiana, which are huge ag areas, and so there's a lot of stuff going on there. But so then I thought, well, maybe I want to go try the venture or the finance route and go work, in New York. And so my brother Mark, huge venture capital guy now, he was working at the time for Mark Andreessen. And so Mark Andreessen very kindly got me these introductions and interviews in New York. And so I went down to New York, and I met with the head of, Mark Andreessen's a big deal, obviously, as everyone knows. And he got me into the head of private wealth at J.P. Morgan Chase, and the head, George Herbert Walker, one of the cousins of the president at Goldman Sachs. And then another guy named Herb Allen III with Allen & Co. And so I interviewed and made the interviews, and this was actually one of the greatest lessons one of the lessons I hope to carry on for folks is that it was a really great experience, and I came close to, accepting actually the Goldman offer. They made me an offer in originally San Francisco, and they changed it to New York. But when I met with Herb Allen III, he was just taking over for his dad. He was in his late 30s. And I didn't know where Allen & Co. was. I had no freaking clue. To this day, I kind of do wonder if I screwed up here. Because I was I didn't know what Allen & Co. was. I didn't know Jack. I didn't know. I knew Mark Andreessen was a big deal, and that's the only reason I was getting these interviews. But then after that, you're on your own. You got to kind of, interview. So I sat down with Herb Allen, and we had this great conversation. He was one of the coolest guys I've ever met. And he was really kind and really great. And we get done, and he goes, well, Todd, we'll hire you here at Allen & Company. You'd be great at this. You can do this. He says, but can I give you some advice? And I was like, yeah, of course. And he's like, I really don't think you want to be an investment banker. You have two passions in life in talking to you. One is your farm, and the other is politics. And he said, that's a good thing. He says, and I really think you ought to pursue your passions and do the farm or the politics or both or one or the other, or find a way to do both. He kind of gave me a couple different options. He says, because that's what you're passionate about. And he says, and let me just tell you, if you do your passion, the rest will take care of itself. The money will come. And he says, but, hey, if you want this job, you think about it, and you call me. Here's my cell phone number.
You take your time, take a couple of days, which is crazy. I mean, this day, I don't. And so I did. And I called him a few days later, and at this point, the White House called. They had the job ready. And Goldman made me an offer in New York, which I did not want to live in New York. That was another reason why. And then Arnold's campaign had reached out to me, Governor Schwarzenegger, and so I looked at, going to work and run Southern California for them on the re-election campaign. And I really wanted to get back to the West. And it was an interesting opportunity. And like I said, it all happened at once. Like the White House thing that I'd been waiting for comes, and Goldman comes, and Herb Allen offered me at Allen Co. But then I made a decision the right thing to do is to go back and work for Arnold on the re-election campaign. And I called Herb Allen, and he said, "You're doing the right thing." He said, "Keep my number. If you ever change your mind, call me," which I never did or ever have, which was dumb of me. I should have kept in better touch with that guy. But he says, "But you're doing the right thing." And he said the same thing to me again. He said, "Follow your passion. You're going to be good at anything you want to do."
Great lesson.
And it was a great lesson. And what I'll tell you about that lesson is not just what he said, because that applies to a lot of people with passions and talents, is that the fact that he took the time for me, and he told me this in the interview. He said, "Look, Mark Andreessen got you in the door, but you got yourself the job." But again, the fact he took that time, I just appreciated that. I mean, he didn't need to do that. He did not. Only he needed to do was take the interview for 15 minutes and send me on my way. And Mark Andreessen would have been fine with that. But he took the time to spend time with me, give me good advice, and he just didn't need to do that. And I think that's a sign of very good, successful people that do that kind of thing. They pass it on, they take the time, and they help the guys coming behind them. And it was the best advice he ever gave me, and I've thought about it often. And at this point in my life, I've been fortunate enough to where I've been able to live essentially what Herb Allen told me.
That's an incredible story, by the way.
Yeah, I'm grateful. I mean,
I've heard parts of that too, but I mean, that's like.
Yeah, I'm grateful. And that's from there. Just to finish your thinking. I mean, I did the Arnold campaign in 2006 for his re-election campaign. A bunch of Bush people kind of came in and took over and helped him get reelected, and that was super interesting. And again, I was not hanging out with Arnold.
You got to at least tell a little bit about. I mean, you work Arnold Schwarzenegger's gubernatorial reelection.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna lie. I mean, at this point in my career, I was not like the top dog, like hanging out with Arnold, but I got to interact with him a few times, and he was great. And
nice guy.
Yeah, he was great. And for me, he was right for California. I mean, he was the right kind of person because that electorate's just way different. I mean, It's not Idaho. And so you got to have, what was the best option at the time? I think Governor Schwarzenegger was, and I think he proved out he was. Yeah. I think he did some really good things. He kind of got a little bit off the rails where I think he tried to do some really good things, and then I think he got a little bit back into movie star mode where he got kind of chastened a little bit and then decided he was going to go do what the box office told him to do, which is what movie stars do. But I can't be overly critical because, again, I think he did a good job, and you have to realize that that's just tough. Even back then in the mid 2000s, late 2000s.
I mean, you had this magical time where you had Jesse Ventura as the governor of Minnesota, and you had Arnold down there, and you're like, what's going on? And now you compare it to today, and it actually sounds incredibly sane.
Yeah, absolutely. You're absolutely right. I mean, that was nothing and totally tamed compared to what we see today. I mean, today is a conversation we'll get to. But
so you did MAG too?
Did MAG. So I did. That's where I first met Mitt. He was traveling through thinking about running for president at the time. Connected up with them. I'd been watching him since he became governor in Massachusetts, and I knew that if he ever ran for president, it might be something I'd want to do. So then after Arnold, I went to Mitt, and I ran the Western states for him when he first ran unsuccessfully for the nomination. But it was a great learning experience, and we won a ton of states in the West. That was just a great experience. And then Mitt had hired Meg Whitman, her first job out of college at Bain and Company. And so when she was thinking about running for governor of California, Mitt reached out to me and said, "Hey, Meg's thinking about running. Would you help her?" And I was her political director. I was one of the senior staff wasn't the top person. I mean, Jeff Randall, our senior advisor, was the head guy, but I was one of the top players in that campaign. And that was a great experience. I like business people, as you know.
Yeah.
That's what I loved. I like business people with practical experience, real world experience. I like people that don't need to be in office. Yeah. Mitt and Meg were both had been very successful in business. In fact, my dad told us funny stories. Another thing my dad told me, he's like, Mitt Romney, Meg Whitman, hey, can I ask you a question, Todd? What do they have in common? And I'm like, I don't know, Dad, but I'm sure you're going to tell me. He's like, they both made a lot of money, and then they went into politics. What are you doing? And I said, well, you're a freaking broke farmer from Oakley, Idaho, so what are you talking about? He's like, well, I thought I would skip generation, and maybe someone would get some smarts. Well, our oldest brother, Mark, got those smarts. He's definitely covered the money-making part of the family. But Meg was great, and she was super smart, and she was trying to do a very hard thing, which we knew. And that's the other thing my dad also told me after we lost with Mitt in 2012. Because he asked me going into both Meg and Mitt, hey, what's the chances of them winning? And I'm like, and I told him both of them maybe 20%. Because winning as a Republican, even, back then, that was the last chance I think a Republican has, other than maybe a movie star again who could win in California. Because the numbers are the numbers.
Because Gavin Newsom's been so awesome.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, they're really smart there. That's why they're all moving to Idaho. But what I told my dad, I was like, hey, there's 20% chance that Mitt could be president in 12. And he told me the same thing. I really remember. He was totally right. He's like, hey, if you told me I had a 20% chance to win $1 billion, I think I'd take it. And he was right. And that's essentially what it is. Winning president. There's only been 40, what is there now, 5 of them? And 40.
Tell us a little bit about Mitt, because I know you got pretty close to the family and Josh and just met the man. And it's a long time working for that guy.
I did. So first of all, the top-notch family, and if there's nothing else you know about Mitt Romney, it's that you can see, I think, in his family what it's all about. Like, he's an amazing husband, amazing father. The love between him and his wife is real, sincere. There's nothing more important in Mitt's life than his wife, Ann, and his family. And that's true. And he's the real deal. He's a real deal from a character standpoint. You can have all the thoughts on his political views or his political abilities, and I get that, but there is nobody that can question his character as a person. And that's the part I think that does bug me when I hear some criticisms. I'm fine if people want to criticize his political choices or his political decisions or whatever, but it's just flat out wrong. I know him personally. He's one of the best men you're ever going to meet. He does what he thinks is right, even if I don't agree with that, and I don't always agree with him. And that's one of the problems we have in politics and in everything in life is there was no person in my life that I admired and respected more than my father. But I didn't agree with him all the freaking time. Okay? Yeah. 80%, 85%, the old Reagan saying is pretty damn good.
Yeah.
When did it become we have to agree with somebody all the time? That's just not healthy.
Yeah, it's not healthy.
And it's not right. And that's what I would say is that, and so Mitt is a good man and his priorities were right. They still are. He does what he thinks is right. And there's some things I don't agree with he's done recently politically, and some that I do. But you cannot question him and his family, and they treated me extremely well. And he was eminently qualified. Everyone can say whatever they want, but if you would have wanted him in president, the world would look a lot differently. And it looked a lot differently in a good way.
I've told you this before, but I had a copy of his first 100-day document.
Yeah.
Honestly, you think you find it online, but if you go back and read that, which I have, it's unbelievable.
Yeah.
And you think about because the other thing that's not popular in our world today is policy.
Yeah.
No.
No
one talks about policy, and you have these policy wonks like a Paul Ryan that spend their whole life saying, hey, here are the fundamental ways to change America, whether you're talking entitlements or healthcare or the border or whatever it is.
Yeah.
There are facts and policies that will improve the country for generations to come that a lot of people on both sides of the aisle spend a lot of time saying, what is the best policy? We don't even talk about policy anymore.
No, it's sound bites. No, it's sound bites. My observations right now politically I think you and I have talked about this before, but I actually spoke, the Idaho Cattlemen's Association asked me to come up and talk to them for a little bit and just about the, elections and what's going on politically nationally. And it was very fun, and they're great people. And one of the things I talked to them about was what I've talked to you about privately, which is, again, going back to this thing of when is it that we got in a situation where you have to agree with 100% of the time or you're the enemy? In life, and I'm fascinated right now about the disconnect that people apply to their politics between their real lives. And what I mean by that is, in your real lives, in family relationships, marriages, friendships, business deals, nobody gets 100% of what they want. you find a compromise, you find a happy medium. Everyone gets a win-win, or no one's going to have a long-term relationship with that person. So how is it possible to apply a mentality of we get 100% what we want in your politics?
Think about every single contract or negotiation, LOI, purchase and sell agreement, lease. 100% of them are, hey, we got to find a way to make this work for both of us. And we got to find a middle ground. We got to find a way to work. It's got to be a win-win for both of us. It is the rest of life.
It's
the craziest thing about politics right now.
And people are not doing that. And I get the counter will be, well, it's so important morally. Tax code is not a life-ending crisis. Like when everything's a crisis, nothing becomes a crisis. Yeah. And the problem we have in politics now is everything, the world, everything, hair on fire, everything's a crisis. Everything is not a crisis. Yes, there are some very moral differences between the parties. That's why I'm a Republican. I don't agree with strongly disagree with policies and morality issues that I believe in, why I'm a Republican. But there's a lot of other areas of policy that are just simply on the margins of tax reform, housing reform, whatever it might be, where reasonable minds have to come together. And here's why this is happening, in my view. People are applying to their politics two prisms that are really dangerous. One, they now think politics is a game. It's like we're rooting for the Broncos. And when you root for Boise State, the Broncos, the football team, I'm the worst. It's if they don't do well, it's because the referees are screwing us, or the other side's done something nasty, or they deflated the balls like Tom Brady allegedly did, or whatever. But whatever it is, there's this irrational ability to root. And you know what? That's fine. We root for our team. Our team can do no wrong. The other team is wicked and war and bad. That's fine when you're watching a football game and when you're watching a sport. It's not fine when you try to apply it to your politics. The second element that's dangerous is the entertainment piece of it, which is they think they're watching a reality TV show. And we all admit this. When we don't want to watch the car crash, but we all kind of want to watch the car crash. We all understand that. But hey guys, politics is not entertainment, and it is not a sport. It is a very serious business. And yes, there are some people who are not good on both sides that are trying to do very bad things. But there also are a lot of good people trying to do good things who disagree. And we say to ourselves, okay, what makes us, we got all the rights in the world because we see the world this way. When other people see the world a different way, we got to make this work. That's always been the ethos of America, is that people have been able to make it work. And that's the danger I think we're in right now that frustrates me. And I think it's because those teams. And I think what's happening, unfortunately, is that we're blessed with great blessings that also become great challenges. And one of them is the information that we have now. It's really hard to get the right information. And so now we have all this information. And Paul Ryan talked to me about this a long time ago, and he was totally right. I mean, which is now we live in a world where you and I can go find whatever information we want to reinforce our worldview. If we're conservative, we go look at Fox News. If we're liberal, we go look at MSNBC or whatever. And now people are going and looking for whatever worldview their worldview is that reinforces our worldview, whether it's all accurate or
and the algorithms are set up to feed even more, right?
Yeah, and
and there's nothing highlights it more on both sides in my mind recently than the assassination attempt on President Trump.
Yeah.
I mean, you get on Twitter those days after, and I think we all were just like, okay, what's next, what next, what next?
Yeah.
And there were wild conspiracy theories on both sides.
Yes. Yeah, and it's...
And they were... And you can just see how these rabbit holes start, and people your point of watching the car wreck and liking it, you're like, oh my gosh, is that true or is this true?
And it's the American idolization of politics, and that's the danger that worries me a lot. I had a good friend of mine reach out to me, and I think you know him pretty well too. And he's a good guy, and he's a super successful real estate guy, and he's like, Todd, how do you figure out like what's true?
Yeah.
Like I'm reading all this stuff and what's really accurate, and I'm like, I don't know how to answer that question because I'm in the business and I have to sort through a lot of read between the lines and really understand, and even I can get hoodwinked and confused and bought into stuff, and before you know it. And again, it's a great blessing. I mean, social media and those sorts of things have done a lot of good things, but the flip side of them have done a lot of bad things. And it's definitely exasperated a problem we have.
What advice would you, because you do, I mean, as far as I mean, I call you all the time because I do think that there are people that understand the world. I mean, you've grown up in this world. I mean, you've been in those rooms. You've been around. I mean, you've spent your life around the country as part of campaigns. Yeah. You understand political machines.
Yeah.
And I call you oftentimes and say, hey, what do you think, right?
Yeah. And then you do whatever you want. I just want to get that note in there for this group. Sometimes he will listen to me, but that's what I like about this relationship, because you and I are friends, and you can do whatever you want.
I listen to you most of the time. Half of the time. But where would you advise people to find truth in today's world? I mean, that's a deep question. I don't know that there's an answer, but you know, like, listen, I've got a lot of family members that are close to me, and they'll ask me, they'll say, hey, did you see this? And I'm like going, that's not true.
Well, I think that...
And there's some things that are obviously not true, but there's a bunch of stuff in the middle.
Yeah.
You're like...
And there's elements of truth.
Yeah,
and
sure.
There's pieces that are true, or some things that are true that blow you away that are like, whoa, that was true. I didn't think that would be true. So I'm not judgmental on that. I don't know the answer. I'll tell you how I kind of I approach it. Number one, you got to take a deep breath. And you can't just jump to conclusions right away. You kind of got to in this day and age, you got to let some things play out and make sure you've got all the facts before, and try to look at some different sources, and not be afraid to look at sources that you don't agree with, so that you can sift through and read between the lines, because you got to be more discerning. Yeah. It's just not going to be that you can say, this is the source and this is the truth. Even on the stuff that I like and read, Vox and stuff, I love that stuff, but I have to basically say, okay, tap the brakes. I got to take a thought here. And then secondly, obviously, I don't want to get religious, but I do think that there's a piece of this you have to use some of, your own faith and discerning, but you have to be really careful with that, because some people are trying
to... People also prey on that a little bit?
Oh, they absolutely, and we're seeing a lot of that. And unfortunately, there are a lot of really good people that are taking advantage of that in the wrong way. Yeah. And that's a sad thing for me to see of people, really good people of faith that are well-meaning and well-intentioned, and politicians who are using faith, and they're it's the sheep's and wolf's clothing type stuff. So
it can get depressing.
Or the wolves in sheep clothing.
Doesn't it kind of get depressing?
Well, it does, but I think the other thing I would say is, and I've told you this, I've talked about this before, and I've talked to multiple friends. I've been a little bit disappointed and frustrating, very disappointed and frustrating about the tone and tenor. But the reality is a couple things. One, I first heard this from one of the leaders of our church. It's not attributed to him. He was quoting somebody else, and I can't remember who that's from. But the only way bad people win is when good people do nothing. And I've said this to multiple people. If good people pull back now, it's going to get worse. And so some of this is then make sure it doesn't get worse so that it can get better. I think the other piece of this, and since I know that's not super inspiring, is I also do think, going back to facts and information, is people need to go back and look at history. I mean, we've been through some rough ups and downs in this country in the long arc of our history. Everyone's like, oh, that's never happened. Some of this stuff has happened before. And we've seen tumult and upheaval and change and challenges. And again, I'm still confident that a majority of the people in this country are, a super majority, in fact, are good people who want good things and want what we all want, which is a good life for our families, and want our kids to be safe, and want our wives to be safe, and want just to be able to live the American dream and be free. And I still believe that that's a bigger majority of this country. And one of the things we need more of is better people to run for office. I say that having also being the one that when I sit down with people and they ask me if they're thinking about running for office, they leave the conversation with like, well, man, you sound like you don't want to run. I'm like, no, I just want you to have the full disclosure. And you know that as well, because we had that conversation. But my point is, like, I still believe we need good people to step up and run, be involved in politics. If we don't, we're going to get what we pay for. And that, I believe, is still a key. And that's why I believe it's like every time I think about, I got to pull back, it's like you got to stay in the fight. You got to use your skills, your abilities to help, to make a difference, try to fight good fights. And in Idaho, look, we still got a lot of great things going on here. And we got great elected officials, and we got a great governor, and we got a great, statewide elected officials. We got a great federal delegation. Yes, we have some tumult a little bit, I think, in the legislature. I don't want to get into all that. But we also have some great ones that are doing great work. And by the way, like, it's okay. Everyone wants to whine about all these things. But, okay, let's look at Idaho. Like, what are we really complaining about? We're complaining, in my view, on the margins. Yeah. And also about future things that we've got to deal with in this state for the future, absolutely. But when you think about where we're at and then where we're at compared to the rest of the country, I love where we're at. And so we got to be happy with what we got. And how did we get there? A lot of local good folks who've run and good people and that have been involved, that have supported them and helped them.
Hey, I'm not going to hold you to this. And I wasn't going to ask you this, Dave. I'm going to just because it'll be fun. Any predictions on what's going to happen in the presidential race? I mean, if I would ask this 2 weeks ago, you wouldn't have said what happened. So do you think anyone challenges Kamala Harris to take that nomination at their convention, or do you think that's over?
I think that's over. Okay. I think Harris is. It's been surprising to me how quickly, but also it shows you the desperation of the Democrats that they've just made the calculation.
So then that's probably it.
Yep, they've made the calculation.
Who does she choose as her VP? Because that's got to come quickly.
Yeah, good question. I mean, there's a good group of, not good group, I wouldn't say, but there's a long list of, from my vantage point, there's not a good group because I'm not a Kamala Harris fan. I know her from my California days, and I think she's worse than Biden, by the way. I
can't wait to talk to you because we haven't talked, but I will never forget. It's got to be 10 years ago when her name first came up in a conversation, and you have stories.
I have a lot of stories, which I won't, but they're not public. But I've been surprised, and I think it really shows you the fear and desperation of the Democrat Party and how bad it was with where they were at with Biden. It's their own fault. They should have known better. They should never have let themselves, because they knew what they, look, this is where the Republicans have been right and others have been right. It's just, the president.
It's hard to deny it at this point.
Oh yeah. And he should have.
They've been saying this for, I mean, it's been public for.
And he's really put him in a bind because I really do think Kamala is a tough, but I also think I just would tell you now the race goes back to more of a, I still think Trump has a slight advantage, but I do think Kamala does a lot of things. She fixes a lot of problems that Biden had very quickly, and she flips the script and the narrative and could change some of the states that are in play. And what I mean by that is immediately she fixes problems with African Americans, with Latinos, with young voters. Like, there's no way a Democrat can become president of the United States without that constituency fired up for their candidate.
Makes sense.
And they were demoralized with Biden. She's, at least to start, we'll see how this plays out over the next few weeks, a couple months. Maybe it doesn't maintain. Maybe she runs into problems. I mean, they got challenges on immigration. They got challenges with the war in Israel, or not Israel, but in Gaza. So
they don't even fake the Israel thing.
No,
I mean, with him coming here right now, they don't even. It's like openly anti-Israel, right?
Well, and that's why. But it flips politically. Policy. This is where you go back to your whole conversation. Like, the policy conversation is a different conversation. She scares the daylights out of me on policy. I think she's way worse than Joe Biden. She's going to pursue progressive policies. She scares the daylights out of me. I'm just going to tell you that, right? And she's not any more I mean, I take Joe Biden half lucid once in a while over Kamala Harris fully lucid because I'm worried about what she's going to do. And that's just fact. But politically, she's much more potent. And it's going to be interesting now to see, because it's a whole different ballgame. That the Trump campaign, I think, has done a really great job in the way they've executed. And even Trump has been more disciplined than I've ever seen him.
You told me early in this cycle, though, he's got a team this time that's better than last time.
Yep.
And he's got a group of consultants that know what they're doing, and
you can tell he wants to win because he's listened a lot more. Now he's going to still do his thing and go off script and do whatever, and that's just part of what Trump is.
Really?
Yeah, big shock. Yeah. Newsflash! I'm making
Judas.
I'm making news history here with that deal, but. What I think they've done is they've done a really good job of one. I have to give President Trump credit. He's been much more disciplined than he has been in the past. Way more disciplined, in my view. His team, Chris LaCivita and Susie Wiles and those guys, have done a really good job, and they were doing that. But the problem they have now, which I'm not saying they can't deal with, that's the question now, is that was running against Joe Biden, and now the script has flipped at least for now. We'll see how long it lasts because, again, now they've got to run against a woman. They've got to run against a younger, there's a lot of
Youth,
things.
youth,
there's a lot of things taken out of play. But, Kamala has to deal with a lot of baggage from Biden. I mean, the immigration is a mess. It doesn't matter what anyone says there. You're seeing that across all polling. You're seeing it across all demos. There may be disagreement on what the solution is, but everyone thinks it's a mess. She's going to have to own that. She's going to have to own challenges with cost of living, the inflation piece, which is definitely, people in this country, and the economy is actually, if you looked at the numbers, doesn't seem like it's that bad. And in some places it's been good, but the inflation piece has just really hurt. And that really hurt Joe Biden quite a bit. And just the fact he couldn't campaign, and they should have known better. I mean, honestly, that's really what the Democrats,
you've been around this, for 2 decades. Were you surprised how they were running that issue? And what was their end game? And it's surprising to me that they took so long.
I think it's a good example, and I think you've seen this not just in politics, but in business and other people when they get in a bunker mentality and they don't listen.
Yeah.
And then they just kind of make up their mind that we're going to make this work. And they thought they were running the same campaign as last time. Last time they had COVID. They didn't have to travel him anywhere.
Yeah.
They didn't have to do any stuff. And he was probably a lot better 4 years ago, mental acuity wise. But I also think they just didn't want to give up the ghost. And I also think it's a sign of how much how little they think of Kamala Harris.
Yeah.
I mean, they didn't really, they really screwed up. I mean, again, they made, in my view, a diversity pick for their vice president instead of somebody who could be president of the United States to replace him. And they shouldn't have done that because, and again, in all fairness, they probably, when they picked her, thought she'd grow into it and that she could be ready for it. But anyone who knows her knows that's not true. And so then they became scared that they didn't really have a good option, and then they thought they could just fake it and get away with it. And again, I think it's a bunker mentality. I think it's hubris, and I think it's arrogance. And I think they thought they could get away with it because they're president of the United States. And they're not the first people to get in those modes, I think, not regardless of party, but I think that's what happened. And I also think, honestly, some of them were afraid from Biden and his family to tell him the truth. And that's my big thing that I think is ridiculous in what you do is I think my view of the world is you know this. I mean, even if people don't like it, you got to tell them the truth. You got to tell them the hard truth. And it may cost you your job. And that's okay. I mean, you got to sleep with yourself at night, and it may cost you business, but who cares? But they didn't do any of that, and they've left themselves in a tough spot to where they have no choice now but to go with Harris because everyone's like, oh, they'll do all this other stuff. And I'm like, how do you do that? How do you pull that off? And so,
hey, there was a couple more things, just random thoughts that's gone by really fast. But
oh yeah, sorry.
The convention, like the Republican convention. I mean, the enthusiasm. I mean, no matter who you talk to or people that were there, or I mean, it seems real, that enthusiasm. And I know a lot of elections, whether it be the Senate races, the congressional races. I know you've worked a lot on the Senate races.
Yep.
I mean, there's still a long time before the election, but the Republican side of the aisle's got to be feeling pretty good about the enthusiasm after that convention.
Yeah, I mean, I think going in, obviously all of Trump's legal problems have kind of, he's been like just on a roll, even before, the tragedy, of the assassination attempt, which again, obviously was super terrible and horrible and just absolutely wrong. But from a pure political standpoint, it was gold for him. And again, I know he and no one else would like to try to get political gold that way because it was just terrible. But even before the assassination attempt, everything was going his way. And again, that's a prime example, I say, of why they're disciplined. When Biden's just been, after the debate, Biden's been just terrible. And Trump has been smart. He just stayed out of the equation, just let it be about Biden. Super disciplined, not something he would do previously. Another good example. And so I think momentum is high. I think the assassination attempt obviously cemented that, but I think it was high before that. I think you have to be really careful about making too many calculations about what will happen in the House and the Senate because those are individual races. And you have to really, we don't have the time for that, but you have to go through each of them individually to really make sure that you can understand. And look, if Trump becomes even more strong and it looks like he's pulling away from Harris, sometimes voters want to check or vice versa. They want to check. They want a divided government. We have a good shot. I think we have some pretty good candidates who are running good campaigns in the Senate, but they're also running against, in Montana particularly, But they're running against really good Democrat incumbents, and beating an incumbent is hard to do. But Trump, it's set really nicely in the Senate. I think the House is kind of up in the air right now. I wouldn't want to venture a guess there yet. I think it's gonna be close either way. I think it's gonna be a 4 or 5 seat margin. But again, if Harris starts to stumble and steps on herself, then could this become a wave thing? And yes, but with redistricting and everything, it's really difficult to see wave elections nowadays as you used to see. A wave's like a swing of 10 seats now, or 4. We won the Senate by 2. So we'll see. I mean, but yes, if you're a Republican, you should be bullish because the incumbent's been so bad, so terrible. All the issue sets are correct in terms of what voters care about: the economy, inflation, immigration. The one wild card that will be challenging for Republicans is abortion, because again, it doesn't really matter what's going on in Idaho or Iowa right now. The only thing that matters is Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, and maybe Arizona, Georgia, and in Nevada. Maybe.
Well, that's where it's decided, right?
But that's where it's decided, and it's decided on the margins of just very low information voters who are not going to tune into this race until late.
Yep.
And so that's where the dynamic's going to be interesting. I mean, I would rather be Trump than Harris, quite frankly, but I wouldn't want to venture a lot of money on it in terms of which way it will go, because I think it's going to be. You got to remember this: it was extremely tight, even with Biden at his floor and Trump kind of at his ceiling. It was still a 2 or 3 point race.
Yeah.
And so now, and that was with the demoralized Democrat base. Now their base is fired back up with the possibility of Harris. And so now I think it's going to come down to the margins. And that's why I think you saw Trump pick Vance. He's doubling down on the blue wall states. He's doubling down on that populist messaging, trying to really kind of win blue dog Democrats, turn out more rural Republicans, win on the margins there. It worked for him in 2016 against Hillary. And then you're going to see Harris lean into progressive, trying to fire up African American voters, Latinos, younger voters. You're going to see, and that's where the policy will always follow the politics. That's what you're going to start seeing in terms of what they're going to promote. In the next little bit.
It's going to be a little bit of money spent between now and then, isn't there? Holy smokes!
Yeah, and the amount of money that was unleashed after Harris got in was kind of interesting to me. That having been said, again, you're now going to spend $1 gazillion on a very, what we really should have invested in if we were smart was a TV station in Montana, because that Senate race, they're spending like $80 million or something. Think about it. How do you buy $80 million of television in Montana? We should have bought a TV station and then sold it the minute the election was over. But you're a smart business guy, and I'm not, so that's why I didn't think of that until it was too late. So.
I think we could talk for like 3 hours.
Yeah, we could.
This is
for
awesome.
Sure. And so hopefully you got something interesting out of it.
I do want to hit. So your company.
Yes.
Riverwood Strategies.
Yeah. So
you do political consulting all around the country.
Yeah.
You're based here in Boise, Idaho. Riverwoodstrategies.com. Mm-hmm. And you guys do races all over the place?
Yeah, we're doing a lot more corporate work now. So we actually do corporate PR and a lot of issue advocacy work. And I'd say now we're doing 80% of that and less political campaigns, although we'll do some, like we just helped John Curtis in Utah, who's going to replace Romney there. And then we're doing work on the Senate races. Great guy. So, and so we're doing some work and then we're doing work for the Senate Leadership Fund in Montana. And so we're involved in some political races. I always will be, and then in Idaho here. But the more we've kind of shifted more to the corporate world. So, the one thing I did want to say to you, or not to you, but I wanted to get a quote in here from my father that I thought of a lot of times, and it goes back to your question about politics. But I apply it to life. Is my father used to sing on the farm all the time. You've heard this one before, which was, anyone can do it when they feel like it. The great ones do it when they don't feel like it. And that'd be my concluding thought on politics in general. I use that more in just like anything in life that but he always would say that was something I never forget. He told me, and it was something I used in my own life. He'd say that on the farm all the time. Anyone can do it when they feel like it, but the great ones do it when they don't feel like it. And that's what we need. More people just do it when they don't feel like it, even though it's a tough environment. there's still a lot of, I still am optimistic that we live in the greatest country. You've said this before. I've heard you.
Yeah.
We do live in the greatest country on the face of the earth, and it's up to us to kind of preserve it and keep it that way.
Well, and one final thought for you. I've got a lot of people that I respect and love in life, and you're right at the top of that list. We're very close, and I think I learned a lot watching you and your father's relationship. He's a legend. Anyone who knew that guy, and I was with you and very close to you when he passed away tragically, and I'll never forget his funeral and the legacy of a guy that just lived his life in a way that he made a difference in other people's lives. He'd be very proud of you. He'd be proud of you. I wish he could have saw old Riggs.
I know. I will just return the compliment, Tommy. I love your father. He reminds me so much of my dad, and your relationship with your father reminds me of that. And I will tell this final story that I got to tell from the governor's campaign with you. And I'll never forget, and it meant so much to me. It was, I was like, I can't remember what it was, but it was, everything's flying, it's all crazy, and you sent me this really amazing text. And at this time, I was a very low point. I mean, it was after Dad had died, and we were dealing, trying to figure all of his state stuff out, and it was just a tough time. It was more tough on you than anyone, I know that. And that's why I tell the stories, because it was such a great tribute to you, which is that I was feeling really down, and just out of the blue, and we hadn't talked about this at all. You sent me this really amazing text, and you said, hey, and it was typical Tommy. It's 4 a.m. in the morning, and never sleeps. And he said, and I don't remember all of it, but I remember pretty much the verbatim what it was, though. And I kept the text. I got a text and sent it to you. And you said, hey, I woke up in the middle of the night. I had this dream. And in this dream, I was sitting in the office with you and me and your dad. And I don't remember what we were talking about, but all I know is he's so proud of you.
Yeah.
And then you said, this is the toughest thing I've ever been through. And, you went through like things. And he said, but I wouldn't want anyone else by my side. And, and I'm Tommy, I'll never forget that till the day I die. Because the first thing I thought to myself is, here I am. I'm supposed to be one, telling you, hang in there. It's going to be okay. Because you're the one that was going through hell. More than way more than me, but I'll just never forget that till the day I die. It was one of those moments. And by the way, I could tell many stories about you.
Well, I'd be in a trench with you in any battle, brother.
Likewise.
And it's
well, I love you and I appreciate you.
Lifelong friend, I appreciate you. It's also fun, as much as I miss you as my bachelor friend. It's really fun watching you be a dad to those kids. And that's the most important thing. And that's the thing. I'm
grateful.
That's the thing old Bill would love the most. So
I agree.
Thanks, brother.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on. Thanks so much.